Good to see you. Yeah, so here we are again. I'm Hayley Lever, Chief Exec of GM Moving, and this is Scott Hartley from Press Red. And this is episode 6 of Creating the Conditions videos that we've been doing over the last few months. And we're staying in the space of measurement, evaluation, and learning today. And this is building on the conversation that we had in episode 5 with Dr. Katie Shern from the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership and Sheffield Hallam University, where we've just spent half an hour discussing and thinking about what we might talk about today. And we've landed right in that space of my memory, my recall from episode 5, where you talked about how excited you were about the work that's going on around evidence evaluation and learning now, the data and evidence that we've got at our disposal compared to what we had at the beginning of our sports development careers 30 years ago. And then at the end, you were looking forward, sort of imagine where we're going to be in 5 years' time with all this data that we're going to have and how powerful that's going to be in helping us think about and enact our role. And so that's where we've landed. We're going to sort of jump off from that point, really, aren't we? We were excited. We were hopeful at the end of last call, and we have both, we've just realised in our sort of pre-call ramble, been doing loads and loads of work in the last month since we last met around measurement, evaluation and learning in different spaces, in different ways, in different parts of our roles. And so I'm going to start off by asking you, what have you been doing, thinking about, wrestling with since we met with Katie? And I might then offer up a bit of the same and reflect on what I've been doing and thinking about. And I think there's a bit of a moment in time just now for a number of reasons where that might feel helpful to bring some of that together, spot some patterns and help ourselves and others hopefully to think about where next. Does that sound like a decent jumping off point? So you were excited and hopeful. What have you been thinking about since?
I still am. I still am. I think we're in such a different space as we touched on last time in terms of having not just the NELP, the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership evidence, but the evidence that's coming out, from each of the individual LDPs and wider evaluation work that's happening across all of the different partners. I think it's a really exciting time, and our challenge is to try and make the most of all of that, isn't it, going forward? And I think that's where my kind of attention has been drawn since we last caught up, was particularly with active partnerships around how they start to bring all of this information together in their patch, whatever their conditions are, whether they've got place partnership investment or place universal offer or neither, whatever the situation is, what's their role, and how does that then get articulated back into the system partner evaluation? There's certainly been a number of conversations in that space, but I've also been been listening to, I know that we've got something happening tomorrow which I'll come back to in a minute, but I've also been really struck by I'm doing this work for the Active Partnership National Team at the moment around the health network, and so I've been listening to active partnerships, and I've been really struck by how the work of just how much change can come from improving our evaluation and learning, and certainly there's been a thread in those stories around how active partnerships have been involved in some kind of intervention. That intervention has been evaluated. That evaluation has given us some learning and helped us improve our story. That improving of the stories helps us create better connections in different parts of the healthcare system, which has led to more opportunities. There's a really interesting pattern there that I've got to try and document for that work. And maybe I should just take this clip from the video, but I don't know. And then we've got this event tomorrow where we've got a number of the APs active partnerships that we work with together, and we're exploring the shift in the role of active partnerships in the evaluation and learning space. regardless of conditions, there's a really interesting shift here, and we've touched on this we've had conversations previously around how active partnerships under the last Sport England strategy were asked to know the place, know the people, know the place, get your head around that. Whereas I think the ask now of active partnerships is very much in the space of know what creates change in the conditions and context that you've got. And they are two very, very different asks. And I think we're now getting into a space of kind of practice and learning, knowledge emerging of what it means to try and wrestle with that shift. And I think there's a lot of active partnerships out there trying to think that through, work that through. And it's not easy, but it's a great problem to have, isn't it? Well, in my view, it's a great challenge to have. And I think, I think there's some really positive conversations starting to happen in that space as we wrestle with the tools that are available to us now, the investment that's going into places, the system partner evaluation and learning opportunities. So yeah, I guess that's how it's been surfacing for me, is trying to kind of work all that through.
So that's making me think about, so what I've been doing, I was just going to jump in there to say what's really exciting in all of that. I think we're about to tip into the space where it all starts to come together. And hopefully. 6 months ago, there was a couple of meetings that I was at where active partnerships coming together to think about this. And at the time, there was this sort of angst really about, well, you've got national evaluation and learning partnership work, you've got system partner reporting, you've got other evaluations around other sort of more program-based stuff, sport welfare officers, local funding coming in, and there was this sort of big, mess, a big sort of soup of stuff, a cauldron, and soup of stuff that felt quite messy, quite complex, and we were all struggling a bit to see how this all comes together. Well, that's a nice problem to have. We've got lots of decent evaluation going on that's really aligned to a systemic, a whole systems approach and a systemic role that we're playing. So that's the kind of discomfort, isn't it? Is that there's a lot going on and we can't quite make sense of it all yet. But what a great problem to have, because that's far better than where we've been before.
Yeah.
Then, even if I think about what I've been doing in the last month since we met with Katie, practically in the work, we've been writing our new business plan for the organisation. Our team have each been developing their individual work area priority plans, we call them, so implementation plans, whatever you want to call it. So we've got a overarching business plan, we've got 12 plans that sit underneath that, and within that, each team has been thinking about what is the change we'd expect to see and how will we know, what are the mechanisms by which we will collect that sort of evidence, data to inform our learning and inform our future practice in that kind of feedback loop cycle. And so I've been deep into this work the last month, trying to bring, the learning from the different boards and things that I sit on to help our team to work out how to make sense of all of this and make the most of the learning and the approaches and the methods and the tools that we can use to help inform where we go next. And one of the things we've been doing as part of that is I've been hosting some informal learning sessions for within our team, because what we've been hearing is that either people who were joining the organisation for the first time, they were coming to work in this way, were saying, oh, I can hear you all talking about these methods and these approaches, and I feel like I need to catch up. And there were also people who had been involved in the organisation or the work for a long time, but a piece of learning has popped up over here, but they're over here. So you might have place team who are really familiar with the National Evaluation and Learning Partnerships work, but over here, the Children and Young People team can't see it from where they are. And so part of this informal learning sessions have been bringing people together from across the team around, and we just asked people on the poll, what are the things that you hear about and you don't really understand, or you know they feel it important, but you don't necessarily have a deep understanding of how to use them or what they're teaching us. And we've just been having a really kind of open thinking space type environment. Had one yesterday where we were talking about the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership, and literally started from the position of what have you seen or heard, and what questions have you got about it? And we had everything from literally somebody saying, who's Dr. Katie Shern, through to people who are really immersed in it and but still have, you know, work to do to understand how to use it in practice. And you right across the spectrum, because somebody who's not been in that area of work, or is new to the organisation, or you're new to even working in this sector or this system, why would they know who the genius of Dr. Katie Shern is, you know? So that was really a brilliant sort of observation. So I've been sort of doing actual business planning and process work and trying really hard to make sure that the next iteration of those plans is smarter, sharper, like more refined, and is going to produce learning for us that's more meaningful and is based on what we've learned over the last few years. And that also in the coming together in that soup, helping us to do that in a way that we're designing reflective practice monthly logs, tracking evidence and data within the organisation in one system that practically can then spit out the data and the learning into, whether it's we're reporting to NHS Greater Manchester, or whether we're reporting to system partner reporting, or whether we're producing a, you know, accessible communications of a story of our work in our annual report. Like, all the data is there, and we're doing it in a more efficient, more intelligent way that's based on what we've learned so far. So I'm going to pause there. But that's why I'm today excited that we might be able to go from the soup and the washing machine, or whatever you wanted to call it, of all of these evaluations, and actually sort of have a really clear plan as to how we're going to make sure we're using them all to inform our future practice.
You've used that word, that term, washing machine. There's a few observations on all of that, you know, that we may want to pick up today. We may not. You know, there's the whole space around skills, isn't there? And my skills, my practice, and the tools that are being created and how I use them that are relevant to my work. There's a whole space there that I you know, that at some point we probably do need to just kind of well, we've touched on some of that previously, haven't we, in some of the previous kind of videos. But there is
things.
Yes, exactly. But there is a space there around how do we prepare the work for, how do we help the workforce across the board? Okay, you know, because we've got that variance that you've got in your team. We've also got that kind of variance across all of the network, haven't we? Whether that's the active partnership network or the system partners network, the relevance of some of the tools that are emerging to different organizations is a really interesting space. You know, you've got some places that are getting place partnership investment in some way, which will have some kind of obligations at some point to do some work utilizing some of those tools that have been created by the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership. Then you've got a set of APs that are not getting place at universal offer, which is maybe a bit different. And what does that mean? And then you maybe have the odd one where we're certainly aware of one AP that the place expansion investment is going into their places and not into the AP. So technically, what obligations does the AP have? So you know, see what I mean? So there's real variance here to help that we need to get active partnerships talking about and learning from each other about, and thinking about, well, actually, what's relevant in some of this work, regardless of the investment. That's the really important bit for me, and I think that's the most exciting bit for me, is regardless of the investment, we're getting some tools now that will help us start to really think about how we observe change when it comes to place-based working, and whole systems approaches. And that's the most important thing. And how do we start to equip our workforce, and how do we start to design our organizations to be utilizing those tools to create even better evidence regardless of the money? And I think that's the really big exciting opportunity for me in the medium and longer term. And that needs some collaboration, doesn't it? It needs some collaboration across active partnerships. It needs collaboration across system partners, and it needs collaboration with any organizations that can help us with the workforce and so on and so forth. So there's some really nuggety things to kind of work out in all of that space, isn't there? Because I think there is such an opportunity there now. Just we're in the investment bubble of the investment driving some of that change now, and in 5 years' time we might be in another investment bubble or something different, but we'll have a significantly better set of information that will say, well, that's bits we're observing that, and it seems to be working, and it seems to be on the money, and that bit needs to change. We'll have a better set of information to help that. What we've got to start to, and this does come back to the Sport England's system partner theory of change, doesn't it? There's one thing. Can you see that? Can you understand that? Do you understand where we're encouraging you to go to play your role in uniting the movement? There's another thing of designing your organization to enable it in the context that you've got. And by the way, we want place-based working going everywhere. so there's a really interesting space here that I think we've got to open up, and we've got to open up the shift that it means in the role of not just active partnerships, but system partners, full stop, around how they evaluate and how they learn. That is a significant space that has shifted considerably between the last Sport England strategy and this Sport England strategy.
And that was one of the really lovely things about the informal learning session yesterday, was that the desire and the craving to learn and to understand and use these approaches is largely driven by a desire to do better work, to make more of a difference, the usefulness of all of that to spit into an evaluation report is, it's really important to be able to do that. But what's brilliant in the culture is seeing that people are turning up to that session because they want to learn about how to do better work and make more meaningful change happen. And that is just, that's really interesting, because it wouldn't be happening without the investment, because you need to invest in decent evaluation to make that shift. But it's not about a culture of proving ourselves to the funder. It's definitely about, I want to know what my role and my contribution, our organisation's contribution is to uniting the movement or to Greater Manchester strategy, and I want to get really good at playing my role. And then when you get into some of the detail, individuals in our team or partners in the work, some of the methods, and this is what we want to get a bit more refined with in this next period, is we've been testing out, ripple mapping and stakeholder mapping, and looking at strong and weak ties, and looking at how to capture the evidence of meaningful data and evidence that helps us to understand the change we're creating in a system, which helps along that theory of change to diversify the sectors and the organisations we're working with in order to reach more diverse audiences, to ultimately that line of sight to 15 active lives data. But the bit that we're working through just in this moment is, should we, do we want to, as an organisation, land on a small number of methods that we all kind of routinely use, so that there's some consistency? So if we were running various different communities of practice and learning, for example, or networked ways of working, tackling inequalities network, or global community of practice, volunteering communities of practice, do we want to sort of try and observe change in a more consistent way, using methods more consistently, in order to get more collective learning out of it, if you know what I mean. So we can make some comparisons to, if you do it this way, it seems to create more change than if you do it that way, which is just something we're playing around with, really.
And I think the evolution of the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership, I think it'll help in that space big time. I really do. We've got an infant, haven't we? We talked about this, touched on this. It's a newborn baby that we've got right now. So we've got to nurture it for a period of time and see what occurs and see where we end up. There's just a couple of things that sprang to mind, and I'm just conscious of that term washing machine, because there's an interesting situation right now, isn't there, where we've got these national investments that are coming down, whether that's investment into system partners from a Sport England perspective, whether that's the place-based investment, the leadership and workforce investment that's coming down. You've got multi-sports clubs, you've got welfare officers, you've got all of these national, 6 or 7 pretty, movement fund, significant investments that'll have some kind of evaluation and learning capacity nationally, and all of those are going to land in place. Okay, they all land in neighbourhoods somewhere, don't they? And the NELP, the National Evaluation and Learning Partnership kind of conditions give us a view of actually trying to think about, well, which conditions are these interventions really trying to shift? Workforce and the welfare stuff is very much, feels to me, about the culture. That's one of the it's part of the sub-conditions. How do we start to observe that? But when you get down to a neighbourhood level, there's lots of other activity that's got nothing to do with those 6 or 7 national interventions, aren't there? Which there's often, like I've been hearing through the work that we've been doing with around health with some active partnerships. There's loads of evaluation work going on that's about other things that are occurring at that very local level that adds to that picture. So the picture at a very local level is much more diverse and rich in terms of evaluation and learning kind of evidence. And so what's the role of the active partnership in that? Because it sits in this space, doesn't it? Partly responsible for contributing to those national evaluation and learning opportunities, partly responsible for implementing some of them. The welfare officers sit within the active partnerships, and then you've got this rich, diverse ecosystem of evaluation and knowledge being created at a very local level. And so we've got to really try and work out what that means for active partnerships in different circumstances. I think that's where this gets really exciting. The use of technology, the ability to maybe deal with more sources of information and do something with it rather than it just sit on a shelf, is only going to grow over the next few years, isn't it, as AI develops and all of that, and so that's the bit where this really starts to generate. Just think, we've got 12 LDPs that put their information into creating that framework. It's going to go to 80. Can you imagine what it looks like if we start to put all of this bring all of this other intelligence to bear into this? It gets really exciting. And so
I'm just going to caution us here, because I'm conscious that not everybody gets excited about this stuff. Some people are frightened of it. But genuinely, this is a real, a good challenge, is that it can feel overwhelming. And I see this in our team, in our system.
I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think it is overwhelming. I really do. And I can understand. We've got these relatively small organisations. Let's look at most of the system partners, not all of them. So some of the national governing bodies are really quite, are considerably larger. But most of those system partners are relatively small organisations, and the capacity to deal with this potential scale of information is unrecognised, I think, for want of a better description. And so I can understand how that feels overwhelming. However, what I would say is the tools and the technology are evolving that will help us come back to your point of create practical methods and practical approaches where we'll potentially get more consistency to being able to implement, because we know that they're going to give us the evidence that will help us even further. And I think we're in the your bit, whether it's the washing machine of trying to bring all of that information together, or the soup, whatever. This is the bit that feels quite difficult at the moment. There's a lot of change going on, isn't there? I think that's the other bit that we need to keep in mind with all of this is Sport England as an investor are finding their feet in this space. We've got other investors that are seeing what they're doing and going, oh, maybe we should think a bit more like that. I'm certainly hearing some things like that in parts of the country. And then we've got other investors that are still very much bums on seats, please. So we've still got a very mixed economy when it comes to how we observe value and change, which will continue to shift. And then we've got this challenge of where organizations are at with trying to move from where they were to being into this new space and their role in it. And I can understand why that feels overwhelming for both individuals and organizations. But will settle down. Well, it might settle down. I've changed my word there, because local government reform, combined authorities, your GM patch is a little bit different in that space, but for other parts of the country, there's some really quite significant change coming through that kind of national policy, and for me, potentially creates even more opportunities for us to use our evidence base. So
yeah, for sure. I was thinking about the kind of the change curve we've talked about in previous conversations about how that sort of two loops model of the dominant system composting into the new system, and that the space that we were in probably 6 months ago in particular, feeling like the messy part.
Yes. And
but if I think about how that happened with the work itself, it feels really uncomfortable, messy, complex, washing machine like, and then it starts to emerge, and then the flow comes and the kind of ease comes, and I think that's where I'm hopeful we'll get to. If I was sitting in a year's time, if we were sitting here in a year's time, even never mind 5, how might it be feeling then? How much clearer could it be? And then what do we do? What do any of us do to help us move towards flow and ease and confidence?
I think that just one other little observation I'd throw into the mix. I'm starting to see and hear parts like public health, for example, mindsets and language shifting in this space. We're starting to see and hear questioning of commissioning models and approaches, and in particular the way that they're measured, and trying to think differently in this space that isn't associated with any particular. We obviously we're seeing that being driven to a degree where those places are involved in Sport England investment, but we're seeing it. I'm starting to see and hear it wider than that, and that's the new bit emerging for me, which I think is a really important part of this, isn't it? Because the more of us that are talking about it, connecting over this, trying to work it through, trying to surface it, trying to put it into practice, the better. I think going back to your question, I think in 5 years' time, you would hope that we've got a stronger set of conditions and an articulation of them that we're growingly confident in. I think we'll have some of those tools that feel very new and at times quite academic, as we discussed in the last episode. I think they'll feel quite different in 5 years' time. Just think of all of the learning and training and all of the activity that will have gone on, and I think there'll be a lot more confidence in and awareness of which ones to use. I still think we're going to be missing some of the tricky value that's hard to capture. I think some of that stuff will still be quite difficult for us to document in ways. But I think
the challenges. Sorry, just on that, I think there are some things that are harder to document, but the other thing that particularly I am genuinely wrestling with just in this moment is how much time, going back to small organizations, big systems, a whole load of work to do.
All those relationships.
Literally in our priority plan, it's like,
you're asking the wrong person, Hayley. I'm going to tell you the whole team should be Valuation Insight. So
well, they should, and they are, and that's why it's being embedded in every single person's plan and objectives. My question, though, is what proportion of time do we allocate? And this, you're going to balk at how crude I'm going to put this, but what proportion of my time? Let's take me. What proportion of my time do I spend doing the work that I've done today? And what proportion of time do I spend capturing? Because I could spend an hour at the end of every day, ripple mapping the day, doing a 6-box evaluation grid of the value I've observed being created. I could do a what, so what, now what, of every conversation I have, because every conversation, everything I do is creating change and value. And that is a genuine dilemma. Is in my team, we are, setting objectives and working out what our contribution to evaluation and learning is. And I am very clear that it's everybody's business and everyone gets that. But there is still a question of how much data to collect and how much just to get on with the work and trust that the change is going to happen and that you know enough about how to play. And very specifically, just to give an example of that, I've been talking to some of the team. We've been exploring how you observe the change that's happening when you're bringing networks together, communities of practice and learning, networks, etc. You could, every time you meet, you could track who comes, how diverse is the group, how much is the group growing, how many different sectors are there. Every 6 months, you could ripple map what's happened and try and observe the change that's spinning out of that group. Should I be asking my team to do that or not? Or do we just know that and trust that working like this creates that kind of change?
The answer to that is yes, we should just trust that, but we don't. Okay, and it's not us, it's the prevailing conditions in the system in which we are operating and trying to influence. And we shouldn't have to do some of that work, but I think we're going to have to for a period of time. And so my answer to it is there's a horses for courses here. I think in some parts of our work, our need to document that value is decreased or is decreasing, and the partners that are involved in it can see the value of it and trust in it. In other parts of our work, particularly where our relationships may be not as strong, there is a need for us to be able to make the case about it. And so I do think when it comes to that, and I think the example you've just given is one of the areas that I'd say this is a trickier space to surface and document value, and some of the techniques are just a bit more time consuming, aren't they? And so my answer would be you've got to make a call on that when we touched on this with Katie, why are we doing this? What's our line of sight? What's our evidence needs about it? Will people follow the heart on this? Have we got a set of partners that are comfortable to follow the heart and actually this is the right thing to do? Or have we got a load of people sat there with the logic in their head of where's the numbers? And if they've got where's the numbers, then there's a story to build, isn't there? And I'd certainly say that from this health work that we've been doing, there's some examples in there of how being able to just substantiate the heart with a bit of evaluation has gone a long way. And so
that's exactly what I was about to pull out from what you just said there is heart isn't enough for some parts of the system at some times.
Yes.
And actually,
so when do you need to win the head?
And we have got loads of evidence of why building networks and networked ways of working is important to the systemic role we're playing. I guess and I'm thinking about, and I want to get towards in the latter end of this conversation about what are the really practical sort of suggestions, tools, tips we've got for people and their teams. And one of them would be, rather than just capturing loads of data to recreate evidence, is where's the best available evidence about the value of creating networks and the change that they create. And I read a paper last week from Maud in the Netherlands that helps to look a little bit at that. It's like when you bring people together in this way and they set their intention and actions, there's some learning about what helps to create more change out of these kinds of ways of working. So there's something for me about, instead of having to come up with our own evidence, how can we point to evidence that already exists?
There's some brilliant evidence out there.
Yeah, but I can't put my hand on it, like, easily. That takes us, I suppose, to the conversation for another day, which is about, which I've been having with Katie and others over, how do we translate the academic research and evaluation evidence into, I can just put my finger on that because someone's just asked me a question, I need it in a presentation tomorrow. In an accessible way. But is there anything else something about, there's the first one. So let's make this actionable and sort of practical for people. What helps? So one thing is being able to help people to go from heart. Don't just trust your heart and your gut, give them the evidence. What else is helpful that you see?
In the sense of?
Well, I guess given all that we've just talked about there, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, well, yeah, I get what you're saying, that's what I feel.
Is this around surfacing value in some of those network kind of convening spaces? Is that what you're, or just more generally?
Broader, just to sort of on everything we've talked about, on the where we find ourselves right now. And if we were sitting here in a year's time and people were feeling more confident, clearer, role, and what might happen?
I think some of the things, I think the space that you're wrestling with, I think, is a really important part of this. How do we? Yes, there is evidence out there about networks, and you use the word important. It's absolutely fundamental to systems' way of thinking and working. So and practice. So the way that we start to capture that, whether it ripple effect mapping, journey mapping, observing who's attending, we've been doing a little bit of work in a part of the country where we've been involved in the development of a network and helping create content for it. And one of the things that we've done every time the network is mapped is just ask people, who do you know in the room, who are you actually working with? And so what we're trying to do over time here is observe whether the network, A, is growing, B, that people are knowing each other or connected, that they're actually, I do know those people, and C, whether they're actually going on and doing some work together. We're not going and asking, well, what work are you doing and all that, which you could do, couldn't you? You could take that into a conversation about, we touched on this before we started the call of, oh, you were here last time, what have you done since? Did it involve anybody else? You could start to try and surface that kind of evidence, because I think, in some spaces, I think that is still needed. It shouldn't be, but it is. And it's an alternative way of showing the value of the kind of work that we need to do, where we're bringing people in and talking, and the whole social network analysis space. There are tools out there that can help to do that to a degree, and there's people out there that can help with that kind of analysis, which will help to a degree. The important bit for me is, we've discussed this before, but what are you doing? What's the value that's coming from you going and taking action together. That's the bit. If we can start to
And that-
surface that, and that's the invisible bit in it.
And the important thing is that process of who do you know, who've been working with outside of this room, which we do in the global community practice, don't we? Often at the beginning, where part of just checking in, like what brings you here today, who have you seen or spoken to since, and what have you been working on together. That isn't, particularly in that case, isn't to prove anything to anybody. It's part of the process of revealing the connections, and then the joy I get of seeing that people have connected outside of the room and gone and done stuff together, and then when they bring that back into the room and share it, that will create another little ripple that goes off in a different direction. And that happened in the last one, and I love that. This is not about demonstrating the value of hosting a community of practice. It's about creating more value out of the conversation. And so it's just one example, isn't it?
And you could document it if you needed to, couldn't you? That's if
I often intend to, and then
if the context was that you need to be able to show that to someone to be able to get more air cover, more whatever it might be, whatever reason you're doing it for, then there is a way of just pulling these data. We already know who's attending, don't we? We already know who, we often collect that data anyway. It's just maybe looking at it in a slightly different way. And there's some really simple exercises you can do to just collect some of that information that don't take an enormous amount of time.
There are, and at the same time, you just run into the next thing, don't you? And you onto the next meeting, the next meeting. I've had six different conversations today. In an ideal world, I would sit and write them all up at the end of the day and log them on my monthly log, and I don't.
I know I'm getting a bit carried away here, and you'll rein me in again, no doubt. But imagine a world where after each of those things, you just say something to AI, and that's all going into one place. And then at the end of the day, you can just say, AI, tell me what that reflects what my experience is off your pot. And then every month we're looking at Hayley's AI. The where this could go is we've got to get into a mindset of some of the tools that are going to be available to us as we work forward. And in 12 months' time, artificial intelligence's capability to contribute in this space is going to be dramatically different to what it is now. And it can already do some of that stuff.
Well, it can already do that now. Yeah. Yes. And I'm thinking it's about our systems and processes, isn't it? And how we design.
It's about our practice, isn't it?
It is. And the thing that has been really powerful in our team is those monthly log processes are designed in, and there's a quarterly sense making process, and we're improving it all the time. But it has been powerful. If it's not designed in to your calendar and to your team meetings and your internal systems and processes, it doesn't happen. And I was just about to say, I'm going to try that. I'm going to sort of try, because AI could do that. It absolutely could do that now.
And it's interesting. Oh, it can, especially one-to-one. It'll do it pretty accurately. And it's because I've been asked by one particular active partnership to start logging my observations of change that I see by being involved in their work. And I've just told myself now, I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to start making some voice notes and putting them into some kind of AI, because it will help just play that back.
So we should hold each other to account for that next time we meet. Have we actually done that? See, this is the bit about Maud's paper.
It is. It is.
What it says is when you make an intention or an action in a conversation on the record, you will more likely go and do it. So
this isn't a formal record, Hayley, unless we try and get someone to edit it out.
So let's just sit back from all of that in the last 5 minutes.
We left a question that I really wanted to answer, which again, I'm not going to give a straight answer. I feel like a bit of a politician today. How much time should you and your colleagues contribute to this?
42.
Well, 3 is the magic number, but that's not enough. So I think it's a contextual situation again, isn't it? You genuinely hear this rule of thumb of we'll take 10% budget for the for the evaluation, and it's never enough. And I think we just need to get a little bit more honest with ourselves and find the processes, like we've just been discussing around AI, that helps us do it more efficiently. Because the answer is we need to be doing more of it. It doesn't necessarily, I don't think, it as in the coming years mean more time. It means more discipline. And I think that's what we're really, I think that's what we're really wrestling with at the moment, is what is the discipline we've got to enact and enable here? Because I think that's where it is. It's in using those tools, doing it regularly, making sure that things are captured where we need to capture them. It doesn't necessarily, because of the way that technology is changing, necessarily mean more time. More
discipline. I'm sure people will be delighted to know that that's the key learning from this session.
But it is, isn't it? It's the discipline of keeping coming back to it.
Yeah, and it's ironic that that's where you and I have arrived. So,
well, let's see if we can change our own behaviours in this next period of time.
I have just noticed that the discipline of doing these sessions is because we've designed them in for the next few months. So there you go. We can do it when we're intentional about it. Going right back to where we started, and just to kind of wrap up, is we talked about what have we been thinking about, pondering, wrestling with since we met with Katie. Hopefully there are some tangible examples in there and things that other people are working on, because quite a few of us are working on this stuff right now. So I hope that some of this is at least resonated. It feels familiar, and I think for me, what I'm taking away from this conversation is I'm going to put in my diary, in a year's time, we're going to come sit back down here and think about the washing machine and the soup. And I think the conversations helped me to be clear in my own mind about what it would take for in a year's time for our team and our organisation to be in a better place than we are now. And we're in a better place than we were a year ago. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to, almost like the discipline, I'm going to put it in the diary now.
Just just think where we were 7 years ago when we first started doing some work together in GM. Yeah, we were some way off where we are now. So, and we didn't have all of the net learning or the system. See what I mean? It's gonna rapidly evolve, I think, in a positive way.
And that work we did 7 years ago with the 6-box grid and the reevaluation. If you think about the bit that the bottom layer of that 6-box reevaluation grid was the space where we had no Scooby-Doo about how to capture data.
Well, we didn't even know how to service it, did we?
So... No, we didn't even know how to talk about it. Now we know why it's important. We know how to talk about it. We know we've got some actual methods to capture it, when we want to and need to, and that's no time at all, is it? So we're back to excitement and hope.
Hopefully.
And and I'll see you in a year's time, and we'll see how it's going.
Well, let's see in the next one whether we've done what we said we were going to do and put capture some of our stuff into AI.
It's definitely helped me, because I'm going to leave this call now and go straight into finessing and polishing off our business plan, and it genuinely helps me to think about that balance, and how to strike it. So thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.